Hey everyone. You know that feeling when you're trying to learn new English words, you add them to your list, you repeat them, but
They
then
just vanish. Like,
exactly, it's like
well,
they never even existed.
it's so frustrating.
Yeah, and it makes you feel like you're never going to make any progress.
Right. And you're not alone.
Definitely not.
So many English learners struggle with this. And that's actually why we're diving deep into this podcast transcript today, how to memorize English, learn English with podcast conversation. Someone sent this in, and they're looking for some more effective strategies beyond just like the basic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the tip about like flashcards and repetition,
Right.
but this transcript digs a little deeper.
It does. It really gets into how our brains actually work and how we can use that to our advantage.
Exactly. And one of the things that jumped out at me was this idea that we often try to learn words in isolation.
Oh, yeah.
Like we treat them as these separate little units instead of seeing them as part of a bigger picture.
It's like trying to memorize a bunch of random phone numbers, you know? It's just not going to stick.
Yeah, it's much easier to remember a phone number if it's connected to someone you know or a place you've been.
Exactly. Our brains are wired for connections. We remember things better when they're linked to a story, a visual, an emotion, something that gives them meaning.
So instead of just staring at flashcards, we need to create more immersive experiences around the words we want to learn.
Absolutely.
And this transcript calls this the story method.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you're trying to remember the word apple, you could create a story about a mischievous squirrel who steals an apple from a farmer's market.
I love that. And the more senses you engage in that story, the better.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, imagine not just seeing the apple, but feeling its smooth skin, smelling its crisp aroma, hearing the crunch as you bite into it.
Suddenly, the word apple isn't just a word, it's a vivid experience.
Right. It's a memory, and I think that's so powerful.
Ex-
I've definitely noticed that when a word is tied to a strong memory or a personal story, I'm way more likely to remember it. What about you? Have you ever used this yourself?
Oh, all the time. In fact, I remember struggling to remember the word labyrinthine.
Oh, that's a good one.
It means like maze-like or confusing, but I just couldn't get it to stick.
Yeah.
So to finally nail it down, I pictured myself lost in a giant hedge maze,
Okay.
feeling those scratchy leaves against my skin and hearing the wind whistling through the corridors.
Oh, wow.
And that feeling of panic of being lost, those sensory details, that's what made the word stick.
I can see why.
Yeah,
So it's really about making the word come alive.
exactly.
Okay, so moving on to another technique that I think is super interesting, especially for visual learners like myself.
Okay, tell me more.
It's called the visual association technique.
Okay.
And basically it involves creating a crazy mental image to help you remember a word.
I like where this is going.
For example, if you're trying to remember the word giraffe, they suggest visualizing a giraffe wearing sunglasses and dancing.
Okay, Wix.
I know it sounds
A
ridiculous,
dancing giraffe with sunglasses.
but there's a reason behind the madness.
I'm intrigued.
Our brains are wired to pay attention to the unusual and unexpected.
That's true.
So when you associate a word with a bizarre or humorous image, it creates a stronger memory trace.
It's like highlighting that word in your brain with a neon marker.
Exactly. It's not just about making things funny, it's about making them stand out.
So it's all about creating those memorable moments.
And speaking of memorable moments, I'm curious, do you have any particularly outlandish mental images that you've used for words that you've struggled with?
Oh, let me think. Well, I was trying to remember the word mellifluous once, which means sweet sounding.
Okay.
To help me remember, I pictured a giant honeybee drizzling honey over a choir of singing marshmallows.
Wait, light?
I know it's a weird one, but it worked.
Okay, that is brilliant. It's so weird, and yet it makes perfect sense.
Right.
It taps into that part of our brain that loves novelty. I have a feeling I'm going to be picturing honey-drenched marshmallows for a while now.
Well, hey, at least you'll remember the word mellifluous, right?
True.
That's the whole point. We're using these techniques to turn otherwise forgettable words into vivid, unforgettable experiences.
I love that. We've got stories, we've got wacky visuals, and this is just the beginning.
Just wait, there's more.
This deep dive is already proving that learning new words can be a lot more fun and a lot less frustrating than we might think.
Absolutely. It's all about finding what works for you and making it enjoyable. So we've talked about stories and visuals, but this transcript goes a step further. It talks about how to actually use these words in our daily lives.
Yeah, it's not just about memorizing them in a vacuum. It's about making them part of our active vocabulary.
Exactly. And one technique they highlight is the context sentence trick.
Okay, so that's about using new words in sentences, right?
Right. But the key is to use them in a variety of contexts. Don't limit yourself to just one type of sentence or situation.
So like if you're learning the word resilient.
Yeah, resilient. You could use it in a sentence about a plant bouncing back after a storm.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or a person overcoming adversity, or even a material that can withstand high pressure.
Right, so you're basically exploring the word's nuances and applications.
Exactly. And that's how you solidify its meaning in your mind.
It's like you're creating a mental web of connections, around the word,
I like that, a mental web.
linking it to different ideas and situations.
And you know what? This actually mirrors how we learn language naturally.
Oh, yeah.
We rarely encounter words in isolation. We pick them up through context in conversations, books, movies, all those real-world interactions.
So this technique is essentially mimicking that natural learning process.
Exactly. It's making it more intuitive and effective.
It all comes back to making those connections.
It always does.
Okay, so speaking of connections, this transcript also talks about the power of teaching someone else.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
It says that the act of teaching forces you to understand a word more deeply.
Because you have to explain it in a way that makes sense to someone else.
Exactly. You have to organize your thoughts and articulate them clearly.
It's like you're solidifying your own understanding in the process.
Totally. So do you have any suggestions on how to make this teaching method even more effective?
Well, don't be afraid to get creative. You could write a blog post about the word, make a short video explaining it, or even incorporate it into a song or a poem.
Those are great ideas.
It's all about finding ways to actively engage with the word beyond just memorizing its definition.
I love that. So it's like turning learning into a playful challenge.
Exactly. And that brings us to what the transcript calls their secret sauce for memorization.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's called the 1-minute daily challenge.
1 minute. That doesn't sound like much.
It's deceptively simple, but surprisingly powerful. The challenge is to spend just 1 minute each night recalling 5 new words you learned that day.
That's it? Just 1 minute?
That's all it takes. That short burst of focused review can significantly boost your long-term retention.
I've heard about the power of spaced repetition, but I've always struggled to implement it consistently.
I know it can be tough, but 1 minute a day, that feels manageable even for the busiest of people.
Okay, that's true.
It's all about working with our brain's natural forgetting curve. By revisiting information, just as we're about to forget it, we reinforce those neural pathways.
So it's like giving your brain a little reminder.
Exactly. Hey, remember this important thing.
I like that.
It's amazing how such a small time commitment can make such a big difference.
It really is. I'm starting to see how all these techniques work together to create a holistic approach to language learning.
Right.
It's not just about memorization. It's about understanding application and creating those lasting connections in our minds.
That's where the real magic happens, when we shift from passive absorption to active engagement.
And that's what makes learning truly stick.
Absolutely. We're weaving these words into the fabric of our understanding, making them an integral part of how we think and communicate.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for tackling English vocabulary.
Me too. It's amazing how many practical techniques are out there.
Right. And they're not just random tips. They're based on a real understanding of how our brains work.
Exactly. We've talked about the story method, the visual association technique, the context sentence trick.
The Teach Someone method, and of course, the 1-minute daily challenge.
It's like having a roadmap for making those words stick.
I love that, a roadmap. And the best part is these techniques aren't just for English words. They can be applied to learning anything new.
Oh, absolutely. Whether you're trying to learn a new language or memorize historical dates or even remember your grocery list.
It's all about making those connections, creating those vivid images, and reinforcing your learning through repetition and application.
It's about turning learning into something that's both effective and enjoyable.
So what does this all mean for you? How can you start putting these techniques into practice today?
Well, I have a challenge for you. Pick one new word today and try using it in 3 different sentences.
That's a great idea. It's a simple way to start incorporating these techniques into your daily life.
And if you're feeling really ambitious, try combining techniques, create a story around that word, visualize it in a crazy way, and then teach it to someone else.
I love it. It's all about finding what works for you and making learning a fun adventure.
Exactly. Remember, learning is a journey, not a destination. So embrace the process, have fun with it, and don't be afraid to experiment.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, happy learning.